The following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
Welcome to the GRTiQ Podcast, the best of 2024, Part 2.
Welcome back to another special episode of the GRTiQ Podcast, the best of 2024, Part 2. In this episode, we'll continue our annual tradition of reflecting on the incredible stories and people who shaped the podcast and inspired the GRTiQ community throughout the year. Today, we're featuring highlights from episode 176 to 200, capturing the voices and moments that made the final stretch of 2024 so impactful. This year, like the two before it, has been filled with insights and inspiration. Each guest brought their own unique perspective, offering listeners a front row seat to the people, ideas, and innovations driving Web3 and the graph. Whether it was a novel innovation, a heartfelt personal journey, or a glimpse into the future, 2024 reminded us all why Web3 is such an exciting space and there's so much to be optimistic about. As we celebrate another incredible year, I can't help but look ahead to what's coming next. In 2025, we'll be sharing a major announcement that promises to shake things up for the GRTiQ podcast and the community we've built together. And I can't wait to share more in the new year. Until then, thank you once again for making 2024 a year to remember.
Episode 176.
Starting with episode 176, this is Emmi Aguilar, host of Grapher Podcast and member of Graftonauts. Here, Emmi reflects on lessons learned from interviewing women throughout Web3. She shares how diverse backgrounds in law, photography, and more inspired resilience and redefined success for anyone curious about the untold stories shaping the blockchain space.
Wow, the passion that each of them has is unmatched. I am so grateful to be reaching our 10th episode and to know that I have gained so much from each of these episodes. Like, it's incredible to see that I gain a lot by interviewing them. Sometimes I think it's selfish for me to say, but I'm learning more than I think the audience is. So especially because they have all talked about overcoming the fear of failure, of trying and achieving. But beyond that, I love how all the women on this podcast teach me that nothing is too difficult or impossible. It's just a matter of perseverance and believing in yourself. And it may be cliches, like these type of quotes that they are giving, but I mean, how right they are. They are very accurate. And I am inspired by all of their background stories because they are a lot of background stories that did not come from a technical aspect or anything related to web. There's this photography background. There is this, law and political background. So I think that it's very good to see this resilience into becoming who they want to be and whenever they want to be, because they can, They don't follow a very specific stereotype. They don't follow a very specific path. They just simply change their careers into Web3 because they feel the need to. They got captivated by it. Every episode that we have is very special because of that, because they are such different backgrounds, but they have this same success story of achieving. And I think that that's the heart of every episode that we have.
Episode 177.
In episode 177, we were joined by Eliot Teissonniere, CTO at Nodle. Here, Eliot explains how Nodle authenticates data in an age of AI and deep fakes, creating trusted networks and geolocational authentication.
So first, I would say maybe if I can address the relationship between Click and the network. The network has density and has smartphones all over the world. And what we realized is that the network can also be used to help authenticate some of these pictures. For instance, if you want to prove that you were at a certain place at a certain time, it's relatively easy to fake GPS signals. You can even do it on your phone. There's applications to do that. However, if you had a third party that has been vetted or that has some form of reputation because it's part of a giant decentralized and global network that were to happen to be next to you and were to be able to authenticate or certify that your two phones were close by and both were in the same location, then suddenly you could prove your location. Right? So that's also one of our realization. We realized that, hey, we don't have to do just connectivity. We can also use it to prove geolocation. So we have a concept calling, we call them witnesses nowadays. So I think the thing to us is very clear that one can reinforce the other or one can make another proof of the other stronger. And of course, for CLIQ, it's very motivating to us because we are working on real world problems that are problems today. We've seen, especially deepfakes are exploding. We can throw a few AI buzzwords around, but deepfakes are exploding. They are being more accessible more than ever. There's now AI tools to generate videos. And even though, there's approaches trying to watermark some of this content or trying to detect AI content, we strongly believe those approaches are doomed to fail. And instead, what we should be doing is to track the provenance of all the content we create. And if the content we created is not tagged or certified as coming from a human or as being authentic, then it may not be real. And the reasoning here is that a watermark can be removed. AI detection tool can very simply be trained against and thus, fail. However, if we start tracking the provenance, certifying the provenance of the content we create, then there's no need for watermarking. There's no need for AI detection tools because the provenance is already here.
Episode 178.
From episode 178, this is John Belizaire, CEO of Soluna Holdings. When asked about the potential convergence of AI and blockchain, John explains how cryptocurrency rails could enable AI agents to conduct secure transactions, while also exploring how AI could democratize sophisticated investment strategies, previously limited to large hedge funds.
Some of the ideas for how AI can be used is this concept of AI agents. So you can set off these, robots to go do stuff for you, book your travel and all that kind of stuff, and do it in a safe way. It may make sense to leverage the digital infrastructure rails that have been built around cryptocurrencies to do that, right? You might go out and send your robot to do these transactions and use those rails because you trust them. They're safer. They're hard to crack versus the old credit card and financial rails for doing that. That might be an example of how those two worlds come together. Many times we've tried to create, these sort of personal financial assistants, with some of these big next generation financial platforms. They have not worked so well because mostly they're not really all that automated. And so maybe there's a way to use this new platform to build out true sort of financial management systems that are powered by AI and can really look at all sorts of, these huge hedge funds. They use AI and machine learning to look at all sorts of things that are happening in the market, the news, et cetera, and then make investment decisions. Well, why can't an individual do that? If you can set off an agent to ingest lots of interesting developments in the market and then sort of create insights around how you can invest. And then you can use AI to do that. And of course, different forms of financial investment resources to do that. You can start to create a whole new financial system and experience and services and so forth. There are a couple of things that people maybe aren't realizing about this whole AI movement. There's a lot of talk about it. And I think what you're going to see is sort of, people get tired of it, and then there'll be sort of like a cycle there, and then suddenly it will resurge and become one of the biggest waves we've ever seen. The internet did that. The web did that, right? The web grew and grew and grew, and then exploded like an atomic bomb. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and then now it has integrated in our lives so deeply that we actually don't even think about it anymore. We don't talk about the internet, but it is part of everything now, right? We're always connected. In fact, when we're not connected, we're very sad. AI has the same kind of potential. OpenAI has ingested just about every piece of data that it can get its hands on. And I've heard mentioned, that some of the other big AI labs they're running out of data. In fact, they're using the AI to generate data to train the AI. Like they're so in need of continuously making these models more complex. But there's a tremendous amount of data that they haven't even seen that lives inside of from the smallest to the largest companies in the world, right? Think about biotech companies and about the information they have about molecules and drug discovery and so forth. Imagine that was pushed into their own AI systems, the rate with which we can discover solutions to some of our biggest challenges as a species around ailments and so forth. We could significantly advance that drug discovery process by using that technology. Imagine the travel industry and how it can leverage sort of travel patterns and what's happening with the weather to improve the experience of travel. I hope to God that they do that, and I hope they don't charge us like extra money for that. There's lots of ways that we can use AI that we haven't even thought of yet. That's what makes it exciting, because its potential is really limitless. And so everyone is going to need access to computing. Everyone is going to use it to enhance what it is they're doing. Maybe Steve Jobs taking up one of his quotes, the computing is the bicycle for the mind, and I think AI is like a rocket ship for the mind. It's the next industrial revolution.
Episode 179.
In episode 179, we welcome Goncalo Sa, co-founder of ConsenSys Due Diligence. Here he talks about his insights on current market trends, such as modularity, composability, and AI. Drawing on his experience in blockchain security and venture capital, Goncalo discusses the themes that WWVentures is focusing on in the evolving Web3 landscape.
There's a lot. There was a resurgence of Bitcoin layer 2s, which was fun because I have an Ethereum tattoo. So I could be perceived as an Ethereum maxi, which I mildly regret now because I feel like Uncle McScrooge sometimes. It was surprising to me that Bitcoin had this comeback of layer 2s because we had tried that before. Even though we're calling them layer 2s, they're not really layer 2. They're more like side chains, what we would call side chains. But it was fun to see that resurgence. So we're taking a look into that. ZK this cycle has been abundant all around. It's not as novel anymore. So I think that it's not this shiny new thing. We're also paying close attention to anything privacy related, to anything that is hovering around the ZK space. I personally, even though we don't do a lot of it within Ethereum, I always pay close attention to consumer apps because I think we need like an insane amount more than what we have today, right? I think that we're lacking a lot of consumer apps. And even though that's not really Ethereum's jam, I always try to push for more of these deals, but it's been hard. If the deal flow that goes through EV is representative of anything, I do not think that at the stage we're in right now, as Ethereum as a whole, that we're seeing nearly as many consumer apps as we should. Besides that, we also take a look at other ecosystems. So Soluna being the other ecosystems that are most active on deal-wise. And sometimes there are things that come through that make a lot of sense. And lately, so anything that is related with the Eigen ecosystem, so restaking, so Ethereum was led Eigen's round. And so everything that stems from the Eigen ecosystem, we're very interested in taking a look at. So AVSs, any of those things.
Episode 180.
And now from episode 180, this is Aki Balogh, the founder behind Market Muse and the present CEO of DLC Link. Here, Aki explains how his work on creating safer ways to take loans on Bitcoin through an innovative self-wrapper mechanism. He describes how his approach leverages discrete log contracts, or DLCs, to enable Bitcoin to move securely across chains like Ethereum while addressing the risk of custodial failures and hacks that have plagued the crypto ecosystem.
The goal was always, let's make it safer, better to take a loan on Bitcoin or to invest Bitcoin. The logic just being, if you have some Bitcoin, you probably want to take a loan on it at some point. Like if it's just sitting there and it has value, you probably want to take a loan. Or if you can like invest it somehow and earn a yield, then that yield is going to compound. And over the many years and decades or generations that you hold the Bitcoin, you're going to make a lot more money if you invest it versus if you don't. That has not changed. But the mechanism of that has, because we originally were thinking, well, this is stuff that gets built on Bitcoin. But the building on Bitcoin for various technical reasons is extremely hard because it's by definition, by design, it's extremely limited. But there's a lot of what's called DeFi, decentralized finance, on Ethereum and other chains like Solana and Cosmos and so on. And so like you have these DeFi chains, but you can't get Bitcoin into them very easily, or there's always a trade-off when you do. We use DLCs in kind of a non-standard way. We don't use it in the way that I described where Alice and Bob make a bet. Like we don't do that. All we do is we created something we call self-wrapping. So Alice, the depositor, like let's say you have Bitcoin, you use the DLC mechanism to lock a Bitcoin with yourself. So you take the Bitcoin in self-custody, which is safer than, sending it elsewhere, and you put it into a locked state using this DLC kind of concept. And it's in a state where basically you cannot spend it, but you lock it with yourself. And then when you do, that mints another token on Ethereum called the SBTC. That's a synthetic Bitcoin representation, basically, but that is liquid. And you can use that to take the loan and do whatever, invest it. And then when you burn that, you get your Bitcoin back. So we've basically implemented the simplest form of maybe logic you can, on Bitcoin. But because it's so simple, it works really well because we don't have any of the typical, like the machinery that's so hard to build on Bitcoin. We don't have to build it. You just lock it and do all that on ETH, where it's actually very easy. And you can also, in this way, self-wrap Bitcoin to any other chain. So whatever new chains emerge, boom, you can have your Bitcoin there, and it's safer. And by safer, I should say like safer to the tune of like, over $100 billion have been lost because of hacks and custodial failures. Safer. So it's actually addressing what I think the biggest problem is with crypto is like, you don't want to like lose your money in a crypto thing, but this is the safest implementation that I have seen that gets Bitcoin and, to another chain where it can be used.
Episode 181.
In episode 181, we were joined by Danny Zuckerman, co-founder at 3box the driving force behind Ceramic Network, reflecting on the concept of composability, how it became central to his and the Ceramic Network's work, and later evolved into a buzzword within Web3. Here, Danny discusses the challenges and opportunities of building real value in an industry that often co-opts terms for marketing.
Man, we have changed our branding and our narrative way too many times because I don't think we found the right way to really talk about the value we provide to developers and the problems that we're solving, which is partly a failure on our part, and partly it's really hard because the industry changes really fast and we're doing things that have really different paradigm than what people are used to. Really, really different when users control their data and bring it from application to application. The benefits are very different. The developer patterns are very different, and the challenges are very different. And so I think we're still looking for exactly the right language. I do think composability has become a little bit more of a buzzword than a useful word. And the challenging thing about composability is it becomes much more useful when there's tons of related data on the network. And it works very easily and well for DeFi because assets are composable, and assets are like very well defined. They're pretty simple. There's very clear standards for what the assets are. So, and you mostly like buy, sell, trade them, where you could kind of loan them or do a few other things. But like the way that you use them and the access patterns is like pretty finite. When you're talking about data, it's not infinite, but it's way more diverse than for assets. And so composability is just as big a value proposition potentially, but it takes a little bit longer for that to really develop. And so I don't think that's the only thing that Ceramic and the products that Ceramic is collaborating with pretty closely to create this, full decentralized data platform. It's not just about composability. I think the first thing that these products provide is trusted and transparent, very effective data storage and management. Like we touched at the top of the podcast about what are the superpowers that make something like Web3 inevitable and we're moving to a world where every piece of content, all data is going to need to be at least in some way verifiable, because there's just too much abuse of data, too much fake data, fake news, too much just doubt about the veracity of data for it to be used across context, which is where it really gets value. And so the ability to have cryptographically verifiable and secure data storage that is as high throughput and scalable and cost effective as what you get in a traditional system, that's like the first really huge thing that Ceramic provides. So you can build with that trust from day one. And then on top of that, you can source other data on Ceramic and pull it in right next to the data that was created in your application and make use of it. And that's a value of composability. And on top of that, you can open up the data that you're putting on Ceramic to other users and like untap that composability and access, have, rules for who can access it when, maybe monetize it. That's like the real power of kind of composability comes second after you have this trusted data and trusted ways to manage it. And so I think if any listeners have the right way to define that much more simply than I just did, the right memes, please shout them at me, because that's not been our strength to date. And I think we are looking to make that much clearer for the users and developers building around Ceramic. And again, some of the other great partner companies that we work with to really unify this into a full data stack, and the graph would be included in that.
Episode 182.
Episode 182 featured Emily Lin, developer advocate at Scroll. Here, Emily discusses the significance of Layer 2 solutions in scaling Ethereum. And she underscored her perspective by talking about the critical role the graph plays.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at the end of the day, rollups are ecosystem builders. Our job is to onboard dApps and fix the UX problem by being fast and cheap. But that's baseline, right? A dApp cannot exist without the other developer tooling and infrastructure needed, right? So for a lot of DeFi dApps, you're going to need something. And for DeFi dApps as well with the graph, you need oracles, you need indexers. These are things that are just baseline requirements in order to exist. So as a rollup, both on the Linea side and on the Scroll side, I have to have graph, because there are so many existing dApps that we would want on our chain, right, to port over that require the graph. There are so many new use cases and new dApps that will need a product like the graph in order to succeed, right? So if we don't have that basic tool, then we are basically eliminating a whole cut of whatever city we could be building on top of Scroll. You guys are key. Very, very, very important. I remember when I was Linea, and then they're like, Emily, the graph is integrating. I was like, hallelujah, this is amazing. We talk about developer experience and EVM parity, right? But then I'm like, but yeah, okay. But if you don't have your most basic, I'm going to keep saying the graph, because you guys are one of the giants of the indexer, I guess, ecosystem out there, right? It's just so hard to bring on a really interesting project, because they're going to go where their tools are.
Episode 183.
In episode 183, we were joined by Garvit Goel, co-founder of Electron Labs. Here, Garvit explains why zero-knowledge rollups are emerging as the ultimate scaling solution for Ethereum. He discusses the shift in the market from optimistic rollups to ZK rollups, and as he argues, why some optimistic rollup projects are pivoting towards ZK technology.
If you go back a year ago, optimistic rollups were all the rage compared to ZK rollups, okay? And people were more excited about the optimistic approach. But I think as the market is maturing, people are realizing that optimistic approach doesn't work. ZK is the ultimate and the final solution for this. It's the right way and pretty much the only way to do things. So you can do optimistic for a while. It can serve as a bridge while you get to the ZK future. But I think eventually ZK has so many advantages around finality that the optimistic approach is actually going away. Pretty much people have realized that by now. I think ZK is turning out. If you look at the Scroll's growth and all, I think it's kind of settling the debate for us at this point. And obviously there's always some competition, but I heard this very recently, that all these optimistic rollup companies are actually looking to launch their own ZK versions very soon. So I think that answers your question about competition, no?
Episode 184.
And now from episode 184, this is Max Scruffer, head of research at WWVentures. Here, Max talks about the crypto markets and how it shifted from predictable cycles to shorter mini bubbles. He shares insights on navigating this rapidly changing landscape by focusing on long-term investment thesis rather than short-term gains.
Yeah, you have to be very careful what you buy versus in 2020, 2021, you could make money on really anything other than the constant rug pulls, which aren't much different than today. I think at this stage, it is developing a longer term thesis of where your asset seems to generate value from and how it plays a role in Web 2 and Web 3. Instead of, just aping coins, it's going to turn into how can I generate these long-term theses. See, in 2020, 2021, you could just focus on cycle semantics, which is the cycle predominantly ends at this point, end of year, comparatively to other cycles. Now, I don't think you get that. I think you get a much more kind of mini bubble-esque cycle that lasts much longer and has many bear markets as well. I mean, we're seeing it right now. You went from mini bull in January, or rather December, to March. Some may say 2023 was also full. All of 2023 was a bull. I think it was the build up to the mini bubble we saw in January to March. And then you saw mini bear, which is a bubble from April to now, full of downward pressure, a lot of dilution, not a lot of ways to make money. And I think that having the thesis of you can sell cycle buy, so buy cycle bottom and sell cycle top is a thing of the past. I think you can buy bubble bottom and sell bubble top, but it's going to be a much more rapidly changing environment where participants need to stay focused and actually develop long-term theses where they don't care about the mini bubbles and they think they can create a long-term vision of where tokens can bring value and gain value in a much longer-term horizon.
Episode 185.
And now from episode 185, here's Jose Betancourt, the founder of VirtualLabs. Here, Jose breaks down the perplexing state of the U.S. economy and its intersection with the crypto cycles. He shares insights on key indicators like the inverted yield curve and the SAM rule, offering a nuanced perspective on whether a recession is looming and how these factors shape economic uncertainty.
I'll say one thing before I get into it as a bit of a disclaimer. Anytime economists speculate over something like this, it's almost always priced in already. So that's the joke, really, that everything is priced in from inception, and it is kind of true. So it becomes very difficult to, of course, time any market. But if I were to, spew theory in a dark room, say with no implications to where things would go, here's what I'm thinking. And I will tell you that unfortunately, a lot of people are confused right now. Because on one hand, we have something like the SAM rule, which is when the moving average of unemployment increases at a certain rate, 50 basis points. And that would be the sign that a recession would follow. That's been the case, I believe, 6 out of 6 of the last recessions. You also have the person who came up with the SAM rule, a woman with the last name Sam, saying that this time it's not true and rules were meant to be broken. And then on the other hand, here's the thing that scares me the most. This is what keeps me up at night, is the yield curve has been inverted. The yield curve is the difference from the 10 and the 2-year treasury. So basically you can go to the US government and say, hey, I want to buy some debt to give you money right now to pay your bills. The US government has bills. And you can do it in a 10-year or 2-year time horizon. Typically, the 10-year would give a higher yield, meaning if you give them $1,000, they would maybe give you $30 per year for 10 years, and then they'd give you your $1,000 back at the end of it. So you get your $1,000 back, and you get 30 every year before, with inflation, say at 2%, that $30 would be 3%, and you'd make a small profit. Of course, the yields right now are actually closer to, I suppose, $55 per year in that scenario, but there's going to be some amount, right? Typically, the 10-year amount, that yield, is higher than the 2-year. Currently, that is not the case. I should say, why is it typically higher? Well, because the future holds more uncertainty. So if I were to go to most people and I say, hey, give me your money for 10 years or give me your money for 2 years, fewer people are going to give me their money for 10 years. And the US government needs to incentivize them with a higher yield. Currently, the 2-year is actually higher than the 10-year, which means investors are basically saying that I have more uncertainty about the next 2 years than the next 10 years, which is crazy, which basically means that we will enter a recession. What's interesting is that this inversion is nearly about to uninvert. They are basically uninverting. And you would say, hey, that's probably good, right? Well, for the last few recessions, and for a reason I haven't been able to detect, and I haven't seen anyone point it out yet, although I'm sure they have. In the last, I say 3, maybe 4 recessions, the recession has actually occurred after it uninverts. So not after it immediately inverts. It inverts, it stays inverted for some time, typically 6 months, and then it uninverts. And that's when the recession happens, not when it immediately inverts. I would speculate that it could have something to do with maybe just a lag effect. It actually has nothing to do with the uninversion. It has more to do with the fact that, after it inverts, it then takes some time. I don't know, but that's something that scares me. But then at the same time, we do have historically low unemployment rates. We have rate cuts coming. The federal fund rate will probably drop by 50 basis points in September. If this interview drops off after that, I would be very keen to see if I'm right. They'll be able to check. And it's really a mess. No one knows. And I would say probably at least of all economists know.
Episode 186.
In episode 186, we welcome Mark Smargon, founder of Fuse. Here, Mark explains the decision to build Fuse as a chain instead of a dApp, emphasizing the importance of vertical integration for payments. He shares his insights on transaction economics, scalability, and how a dedicated blockchain can better serve businesses and users in an evolving crypto ecosystem.
Perfect question. So it was really, again, a lot of mistakes led me to this point. We had a lot of, trial and error on building wallets and explorers. It's not for the lack of building that I realized, okay, we need to be a chain. So there's several explanations. One, we understand technology is not there yet. It's not mature yet. One of the main things that I kind of pivoted in the last 5 years, Fuse started exactly 5 years. We have a birthday now in August. The main thing I would say that changed in the last 5 years, in my understanding, the main thing that I realized is how premature we are. Because when I started Fuse, I thought, okay, crypto is great for developers, but it's just not yet great for consumers. But if you're a developer, go have fun. It's a free buffet. Everything is open source. The only problem is that some of the food will poison you if you don't really know what you're doing. And actually developing contracts, it's counterintuitive. You shouldn't develop a contract. There should be a strong disincentivization for developers to actually build their own contracts. The real value add of this technology, that every contract is like a standard backend that is supported by all exchanges, all wallets, and all institutions. So when you have this consensus where you have all the big institutions in the world agree that this address represents dollars, and all the big wallets in the world support it, and all the big exchanges in the world support it. This is not a small thing. If you know how businesses work and how the tech stack works and how ERP systems work and POSs work and Visa works, you realize that this is a huge, huge innovation. So how to create a project that you can raise money for that has a way to protect itself. How do I protect my business model where this technology is up for grabs? Everybody can access it. And actually anybody can fork you. What do? We build a chain, because a chain can be upgraded. It can be forked. A lot of times somebody is confusing Ethereum as a currency and Ethereum as a chain, as a network, and Ethereum as a technology. Until we start to kind of separate those things, chains is all we got. So Fuse as a chain is able to build a community that will create, this idea that those businesses can work together. We don't own the network. Otherwise, what's the point? We don't want to replace Visa with another Visa, right? So we want the community ownership aspect. We want the grassroots bottom-up approach where we don't exactly build the technology because we don't know if ERC20 is the best standard out there. Maybe there's something better. So we don't have an opinion about what is the best standard? We're using the standard that everybody else are using. Or in other words, we're not trying to compete with the internet. We're just using HTTP and TCP/IP. And Ethereum is kind of like the HTTP of money. So we realized this and launched an EVM. That was a really good approach. It wasn't fashionable to launch chains, and there was no like L1 or L2 in 2019, but it became fashionable a little bit later. But we got a lot of growth from just choosing to be a chain. Another aspect is that once you have a community, nobody can fork you. Since you're a chain, you can think about, like, they can fork the technology, they can't fork the users, they can't fork the liquidity. So you have a way to defend your business model. And in a nutshell, you can think about a use case that is built around your chain, around your stack. In my opinion, payments, they need a vertical stack and they need vertical integration. If you sit in the US, you probably know Starbucks is the biggest loyalty program in America and probably the world. And the reason it's so popular because they did vertical integration. They have the app and they have the POS system and everything vertically integrated and everything like super frictionless. And this is the holy grail of how payments should look and work. This is why we need a vertical stack, which is totally free, totally open source, absolutely non-custodial, but it's built around payments. So there needs to be some thought about the unit economics of a transaction. And if you look at blockchains and fees, it's notoriously bad. The situation is really bad. There's no like equilibrium in the market where people know exactly how much a transaction should cost. So you ask yourself, what is the intrinsic value of settling on Ethereum versus Fuse, or how can you even compare? You're also thinking about what should be, we want the fees to be high enough so they won't spam us, but low enough so won't fork us, so that you have these different verticals where different equilibriums will exist. And our world, businesses shouldn't pay retail prices for block space. In our world, they're paying wholesale prices. So it's a whole different thinking about the unit economics of a transaction, because we're trying to be comparing it to Stripe, which charges 3%, and Visa, which charges roughly 1%, and not compare it to Ethereum that has a very wide fluctuations in fees. And probably Ethereum will change and it would be more stable and the fees would be lower. But I don't think they would be lower on a scale that we're thinking about. We're thinking about onboarding billions of users to crypto. So I don't imagine in the future that users will pay gas in chains. They don't pay Facebook and they're not going to pay Ethereum. There's not enough investors in the world to pay Ethereum. So if we want Ethereum to scale, we need to think about, a different way to price transactions. Of course, low denomination transactions, they shouldn't go on chain. Like you don't announce $5, I bought a coffee on a global settlement network, right? You use Ethereum to move billions across continents. You wouldn't use it the same way for buying $5 of coffee. So my point is that you need to think about the use case and you need to think about the vertical stack. And this is why we chose to build Fuse as a chain bottom up. And we build the middleware and build the SDKs for the apps. So we're really trying to think what an operator needs. An operator that doesn't want to do the heavy lifting of building non-custodial wallets and, loyalty systems that are powered by Ethereum. I think this is really hard for someone in 12 years in the space to build. So definitely newcomers shouldn't worry about it. They should just go to our website and check out the stack and start, building from like templates and white label wallets and really thinking about onboarding businesses, because that's the way to scale this world.
Episode 187.
In episode 187, we welcomed Eshan Chordia, co-founder of Lumino AI. Here, Eshan takes a broader look at the future of AI across the entire stack, from hardware and software infrastructure to models and applications. And he argues that advancements in AI chips, open source models, and how new AI tools will disrupt entire industries, reshaping the way we interact with software.
I'm not great at predicting stuff, so I'm gonna make a bunch of predictions, and we can come back in 5 years and see how right I was. There's like the chip level, which is, for listeners, the chip is like the bottom level, right? That's like the infrastructure. That's the hardware infrastructure level. So there's the hardware infrastructure level. There's the software infrastructure level. There is the model level, which is like the large language models. And then there's the application level. So like the AI stack is fundamentally comprised of these 4 levels, these 4 layers. And there's innovation happening at every layer of the stack. So there's going to be, the next thing isn't just one thing, but it's the next thing at every layer of the stack. So I'm going to start with the chip level, and then I'll work myself up through all the levels. At the chip layer, I think we're seeing this like a lot. I think there's a lot of new publicity around this, but in general, like NVIDIA is not going to be the dominant. They might have a majority, but they will not own 95% share of AI chips, both on training and on inference. Like by the end of the decade, like that's not going to happen because there's just too much money to be made. And you know how we had Bitcoin ASICs, right? Application specific integrated circuits. Like AI ASIC is the same. An AI chip is just an ASIC, right? So we're going to get specific AI chips that run on chips that are much more efficient for training and for inference. So I'm expecting, 3 or 4 companies to win in the inference market or become big enough in the inference market that one of these conglomerates, big tech companies, buys them, both on inference and on training, right? And it might also be like AMD GPUs or AMD AI chips so it might not be like a startup, it might be like a big company, right? And Google TPUs are already really good, but Google's never released that. You can use it through Google Cloud, but like you can't get those through any other clouds. And we already know that Amazon and Microsoft and others are building their own GPUs. And then we know that Apple has been building their own GPUs for their own machines, not for cloud, but for their laptops and the iPads and the iPhones, right? So that's one thing on the chip level that's going to happen. And I don't think that's unknown. I think that most people generally buy that. The second thing I think that's going to happen on the chip level is that we're going to start seeing a lot of on-device inference. On-device inference will come first, and then on-device training. And then, the fact that we kind of understand now about data privacy, like I think in the 2010s, people really were not worried about, like normal people were not really worried about data privacy and other stuff because it wasn't really clear what was happening with the data, but it is today, right? So we're going to see a lot of on-device inference and on-device chips coming. And so like when we think about Luma, we're like, okay, on-device training is going to happen. We don't know when, but we need to be able to kind of support that, right? Not just cloud-based training. Apple's already doing on-device inference right now, but they're doing it with deep learning. I think generative AI and foundational model on-device inference is going to be super interesting and will happen a lot more, especially starting with like customers who are willing to pay for it. So, Apple customers, I guess, will be the first ones. That's the chip level. Then we have the software infrastructure. So that's hardware infrastructure. Then we have software infrastructure. I think there will be a bunch of winners in both decentralized and centralized in software infrastructure. And we are like, we're at that level. We're working with GPUs and GPU providers, but we're a marketplace, and Lumino builds out software. We don't actually build hardware, which is why I call ourselves a software infrastructure company, even though we work with hardware infrastructure providers, right? Data centers and stuff like that. I don't know if there is anything actually interesting to say in the software infrastructure level. It's just, this is more like enterprise business, right? Building out really cool tools for developers and stuff like that. Then there's the modeling level, which I think people find, with the chip level, like the most interesting, because that's GPT-4, GPT-4o, Gemini, Llama 3.1, right? The next set of things will be like, okay, there's basically 2 pathways happening in foundational models. One is, how do we make models like bigger and better, right? And so I think GPT-4o is already like over 1 trillion size in parameters, right? And Llama 3.1, 405 is obviously 405 billion parameters. There will be like a push to like make these models bigger. We will need more compute. It'll try to do everything, right? So training costs will go up, but we're going to see over the next, 3-4 years, these models will be able to do more and more. And the hallucinations that we're seeing today, you won't see like mass scale hallucinations. You'll see more like nuanced hallucinations, and you'll really need to be an expert to understand what's hallucinating, etc. But the second point to that is that you're going to see small specialized models. And when I say small, I'm talking about like, a couple billion parameters to 10 billion parameters. So like Llama 3.18b being used that are cousins of the very large models being used in a lot more places because you don't need that much compute to do a certain job. You can fine tune a small model and get the job done, and it's way cheaper and it's way faster. So I think we'll see the big models being used for certain applications and smaller models being used for a lot more applications that are good for like one specific thing or two specific things. I am curious to see what happens. The best model in the world, I think in general, is like people think that OpenAI has the best model in the world, right? I think Llama is close for it being open weights, but not open source. And Mistral is close. Again, it's open weights, but not open source. I'm hoping that we are actually able to build an open source and open weight large language model. I want AI to become more open source. This is something I actually think will happen. So I'm predicting it now that somebody will be able to build an open source large language model that is very, very good. Let's say like 90 to 95% of GPT, OpenAI's capabilities. I know we're already almost there, but like at scale, even among the community, like when people say open source, what they really mean is open weights. And almost everyone I talk to is either using like Llama or they're using Mistral. And those are open weights, but not open source, right? So what I'm actually predicting is that an open source model will get mainstream usage in building models. And then there's the application layer, which, man, things are about to change a lot in the next few years on the application layer. We use these models to build applications. When I go to these events in SF about AI and just to be able to learn about sales and go to market, the amount of things that people are doing, reshaping the way that we interact with software and the things that software does for us today, it is breathtaking. I love being in the Bay Area right now with just the amount of stuff that's happening, that people are using AI to build applications for. I went to WWVentures event, go-to-market event a few days ago. And, people are redoing how sales software works, how marketing software works, how cybersecurity software works. I mean, it's all over the place and it is great. So I think this is probably the easiest prediction, but I think we're going to see more and more companies strip out these legacy software, especially the legacy vertical SaaS companies, and just build out like an AI and a UI, a user experience on top of that AI that does that job like better at a way cheaper cost, like a magnitude cheaper cost, one order of magnitude or more cheaper. And then somebody is going to be like, oh, let me build this like AI as a service and let me do what Salesforce does, or let me do what Workday does, or let me do whatever, name a vertical enterprise SaaS company does. And I'm going to just reimagine the user experience. So it's going to be better. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to be faster, and it'll be an order of magnitude or more cheaper. And I'm totally expecting that to happen. And I'm super excited. And at Lumino, we believe that so much that we always try out the new AI tools. So we use, Claude and GPT internally for everything, development, research, etc. We are trying out this new tool called Cursor AI. Don't know if it's going to be great or not, but one of my friends recommended, right? I just think the user experience of all of these tools that we've known for like the last 10, 15 years about to change. It's going to be great. I'm super excited.
Episode 188.
And now from episode 188, Riad Wahby, co-founder of Cubist, reflecting on the evolution of Web3 as a convergence of multiple waves, including censorship resistance, technical innovation, financial disruption, and emerging consumer use cases. He explains how these diverse motivations have shaped Web3's past and present, and where it might go next as it begins to offer real-world value.
I think it's really all of those. I think Web3 is actually multiple sort of simultaneous waves crashing. So, I mean, the earliest ones, as I said, like my perspective on the very early days was, through the lens of the discussion happening on the Cypherpunks mailing list, where it was really, folks talking about censorship resistance and, money that's not tied to a government. And, because there was this very this strain of technology will free us from, the constraints of, fallible governments or whatever it is. I don't know if it was quite explicitly that anarchist in all cases, but So the idea that you could build money that wasn't reliant on effectively on a military to produce the value of the money was sort of very interesting to these folks, right? Like technology is enough, right? And so through that lens, it really was this tool of like, well, the government doesn't need to do this function anymore. And that's really interesting. And so I think that's obviously one version of it. And if you talk to Bitcoin old timers and you talk to folks who have that attitude, like that's the important feature of Web3 and everything else is details. And then, of course, you have sort of another wave crashing, which is all the people who see this as, look, there's really interesting stuff to do. There's cool functionality that we could build that completely sidesteps the financial system. And I think, you look post-2007, post-2008, like sidestepping the financial system was itself a goal because it's like, well, this thing failed us once. Well, we want to make sure it won't fail us again. And I think these folks had also in their heads the fact that, like, not only could we do that, but we could do it in a way that, like, really makes use of interesting cryptography, interesting technology. You basically get these folks who are almost building up like a parallel academic system, right? Like there's this whole, if you look at the discussion around EIPs or, the way that ETH2 was designed, like people are kind of coming up with novel technical ideas that definitely are, on par with the kinds of like novelty and the kinds of like the difficulty of an idea that would be like an academic paper. But they're not interested in publishing an academic paper necessarily. They're interested in like building the system out of it, right? So this is basically this parallel track for people to do like real interesting research on like cool stuff. And then of course, DeFi, well, there are plenty of people who want to make money and who are really good at it and who have a lot of knowledge from sort of traditional finance or fintech and can apply that in this setting. And, so I think we saw the rise of, MEV and things like this, which personally, I think of those things as like really besides the point and kind of bad for individual users. But certainly they were an inducement for a huge number of people to jump in and like can make a ton of money on, a certain strain of HFT that's taking advantage of whatever, some deep technical details, right? There's many different people who are sort of all into this for, somewhat different reasons. And I think finally, we're starting to see, I hope, consumers who are coming into it because it's actually providing them some value. We had folks playing games and that's okay. There was some play to earn kind of stuff going on. Maybe there still is, but that was like the real heyday of that was a few years ago. That isn't yet quite a consumer technology. That's still a quite niche thing. I think when we start to see people who are consuming, I don't know. So for example, I think that the stuff where like Nike is selling NFTs of like physical objects, that's interesting because that's like truly a consumer thing, right? And if it's, ticketing and like instead of, buying a physical ticket or buying one from, I hope not from Ticketmaster, like instead you're able to do something else that's like built on top of blockchains. Like that's actually making people's lives better. That's like helping them to do things that they cared about already and not just like some new thing that you could do because it's cool, right? So I'm hopeful that like all of these waves sort of converge. And what we really have is, a lot of people in it for different reasons, just as with any other tech, but really like a motivation that is not just like, oh, well, there's some quick bucks to be made here.
Episode 189.
Now from episode 189, this is HQ, co-founder of DSRV. Here, HQ explains why the graph is a cornerstone of Web3 infrastructure, highlighting how its decentralized data marketplace and incentive model has become essential for blockchain services, solidifying the graph's role in the future of the Web3 ecosystem.
I believe the graph has already become an essential infrastructure component in Web3. Numerous blockchain services rely on the graph to operate their services and use it as a key gateway for providing data. While alternatives are emerging and new methods to provide the data are being introduced, the graph successfully combines a decentralized data market with an incentive model which blockchain can provide. So I expect it will continue to play a critical role in Web3 market in future too.
Episode 190.
From episode 190, this is Anne Ahola Ward, reflecting on lessons learned from marketing in the crypto world and how the rules of the game differ from traditional industries.
It's always been very different. I worked in and around crypto for a long time, over a decade. I would say where it really got interesting was probably the ICO rush, like 2016-ish was when things got kind of crazy. And it was like, oh yeah, we got to have this Telegram that's got a bajillion people in it. You've got to have this many Twitter followers. You've got to have, here are these 200 listings you have to be on and sponsor to look like your coin is going to be like the hottest, or, you know, whatever your pre-launch stuff, right? That was a very different playbook to me the first few projects I did. And the MVP is the ICO horse is still one of my favorite examples of what it's like to work in the space. But it was very interesting to me, the emphasis of Twitter followers, the emphasis of this directly being tied to company revenue, because it was. And so it's a completely different playbook, and it still is today. There are things that are common, right? But, you know, it's its own beast. For that reason, I definitely have loved my time in the space because it's very different. You know, depending on like where you started and where you're incorporated, you can and cannot say certain things on your public website. You may have, you know, a foundation you're starting from versus there's all sorts of nuances to it that have made it very interesting to me. You know, and I did a lot of work last few years in DeFi. I found that to be a more interesting vertical for a lot of reasons. I think banking needs to be disrupted. I love the idea of programmable money, but my goodness, so many rules. So many rules that you don't even, I mean, having to get legal approval on tweets is something I hadn't done in a long time, but it's something that some startups have to do.
Episode 191.
And now from episode 191, featuring Ben He, general partner at Orange DAO. Here, Ben challenges common misconceptions about decentralization in Web3 and explains why decentralization is more of a direction than a definitive state, and emphasizes the necessity of maintaining accountability within decentralized systems for long-term success.
There's a fundamental myth about decentralization, and it's hard to address because everybody thinks about it a little bit differently, but don't realize that they are, because they use the word decentralization as if it actually means something. It doesn't really mean anything. Decentralization is a direction towards giving more people authority and power than we did before. It is also a technique, but the technique is so varied. Like I just gave you three examples of companies where decentralization is the core of the identity, yet we couldn't tell you what that was. Everybody's kind of doing it differently. The flip side of decentralization is that while you can decentralize authority, and you should, you cannot decentralize accountability and be successful. You cannot say because we're decentralized that nobody is accountable for the actions of the network. That is absolutely not true. Somebody is and must be in order for the network to actually be healthy and move forward and scale.
Episode 192.
In episode 192, we welcomed Steve Kim, co-founder of 4 Pillars. Here, Steve shares why he considers the graph an essential component of the Web3 ecosystem, and explains how the graph solves one of blockchain's most difficult challenges, indexing and querying data, while empowering developers and researchers with tools that save time, resources, and effort.
The reason why I wrote about the graph is because the graph is the irreplaceable component of this industry, because indexing a data from blockchain is the most difficult thing that you can do, because, you know, just blockchain in general are really hard. And if you're trying to access to the raw data on top of blockchain, if you are just engineer, you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of human resources to do it. So what the graph is doing is that the graph is doing on the behalf of those engineers and on the behalf of those front-end engineers, especially by decentralizing the indexers. So the graph is basically incentivizing all those the participant co-indexers to index the raw data, which is kind of really difficult to index the data for them, for the engineers, for the developers. So whenever blockchain developers are finding the information and data on top of blockchain, they can save much more time. How many blockchains, how many crypto projects are actually solving the problem? None, to be honest, not so many. But whenever I found out about the graph, these guys are really solving the problem, because you guys are not just, solving like non-existing problem and then maybe inflating some tokens. You guys are not doing that. You guys are just having a clear problem statement, and which is really, really, really problematic, because whenever I talked to all the engineers and builders back in 2016, there were no ways for them to actually find good data, good quality data, and use that data to actually maybe like querying the data to come up with a better front end. They have to spend so much time and so much resources. But nowadays with the graph, they can easily querying the data. And as you know, the statistics can tell us that major protocol, major applications are now using the graph to index and to querying the data. So you can tell that the graph is solving the problems that actually a single person cannot solve. And you guys are doing it by incentivizing those participants to do it voluntary way. So that's the most valuable thing that I saw in this industry, because you guys are a crucial part of this industry. And since you guys are doing really crucial thing and essential thing, I, as a researcher, I think that it is worth highlighting you guys and what you guys have done and what kind of path that you guys have gone to the public and to the institutional players, how important that what you guys are doing is. So that's my basic perspective. You guys are solving the real problem, that you guys are not just shadow boxing. You guys are doing really what the industry needs. So that's the most thing that I appreciate as a researcher. Even as a researcher, I have to use the graph. You guys are doing the ChatGPT kind of stuff on top of the graph. And as a person who cannot code, I found that really helpful, because I cannot use Dune, I cannot use anything like that. But if I use that ChatGPT kind of application on top of the graph, I can easily actually query the data. I can easily find the data using that infrastructure. So I think what you guys are doing is really innovative and very, very fascinating. And as a researcher, I have to cover. There's no choice.
Episode 193.
In episode 193, we welcome Julian Zawistowski, director of the Golem Foundation. Here, Julian is reflecting on Poland's rapid economic transformation after communism. Drawing from both personal and professional experience, Julian shares why considering the social costs of economic change is critical, emphasizing the long-term societal impacts of these types of transitions.
Transformation in Poland was so kind, like a sharp transformation. So everything like changed like that in a day, literally. That came at a huge social cost. And we have like a never-ending dispute if that was necessary, if that social cost could be like a lower. I believe that what we can see in the society right now is that they were probably so massive that like a society is maybe not permanently, but like for a long time, like divided into groups that like benefited from the transformation and did not benefit from the transformation. And of course, like it is getting like better and better now, but you can still see, this rift. And especially now in the times of like a political polarization, in the times of like people not being really able to cooperate anymore, but rather entrenching, in different like camps, different tribes. I think that processes that date back to 1989 makes that problems like much greater in Poland right now. my advice would be that even if you are a very a liberal economist, you should really consider a social costs of the changes. This also comes from studying economics, that on paper everything looks great. You've got only numbers, but at the end of the day, a perfect model never exists in reality, and you always have people who are left behind because they are not able to move from one city to another, that are not able to retrain in a month to get new job, because the capital comes to the different places than where the job creation happens in the different places than job destruction, and so on and so on. I could really dig into that, but I actually worked as a consultant in economics for many years.
Episode 194.
For episode 194, we welcomed Mark Lin, associate at Boost VC. Here, Mark defends his thesis from the popular blog, The Token is the Product, against criticism of promoting hype over substance. He explains how hype can play a legitimate role in crypto ecosystems when combined with tangible value creation, drawing parallels to how Elon Musk strategically aligns product development with funding cycles.
I think that criticism is, generally speaking, true. I made an argument that is hopefully an intellectual argument about why hype has worked, right? And I think the problem is that there are so many of us who are really focused on using our logical brains, and that information has not made its way into our brains. We've filtered it out in every other capacity. Certainly over many years, I managed to filter out this fact that many other people in the crypto space already had figured out, which is the tokenism. But I had lived in ignorance for years. And I'd hoped that by writing in this, I don't want to say high-minded, but, in a way that was I was trying to be very evidence-driven. I was trying to be very specific and highlight very tangible examples of why the hype works and what is the dynamic at play here, looking at it through maybe a scientific lens. And so, that was definitely my intention. I think it's definitely hype, right? That's a maybe great way to think about it. But I do think that ultimately the best tokenized systems are not just hype. Again, Elon Musk, you can look at the work that Elon Musk does and the way that he raises capital for himself as oh, he's just a hype man. Sure, but he's also really talented at having his having his product cycles driven in a way that they actually reinforce his capital structure and his ability to raise capital is really interesting and actually not that common. Most people do product development driven by customers. They don't really think quite as much about product development driven by the people who are actually funding this. But the reality is in crypto, sometimes all those three people are the same person. Your customer is your investor, is your user, and might also maybe run a node in some other context. And so things get so blurry in the crypto space that I think everyone needs to kind of pay attention. Like I said, my goal was to kind of shake people and wake them up and wake them up to the value of hype, and to emphasize in the article that just doing that alone is obviously still scamming, right? And just selling people tokens and never delivering anything. I mean, good luck doing it for very long, but that's not what we're talking about, right? And we're not talking about building a successful tokenized system in that way. You're just talking about that's a different kind of activity. And my hope is that anyone reading the article sort of understood that was not my intention or really what I was trying.
Episode 195.
In episode 195, we welcome Jerem DeVelter, COO of Persistence Labs. Here, Jerem explains why Bitcoin DeFi has the potential to outpace Ethereum DeFi. He highlights Bitcoin's dominant mindshare, its evolving programmability, and how lessons from Ethereum's experiments are accelerating Bitcoin's DeFi adoption.
I think the main reason for me is mindshare. Look, if I say anyone who's not in the industry, I say look, I'm in crypto. Oh, crypto is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is crypto. And people don't really look further than that. So I think mindshare is the number one reason that it could work, I think. Maybe another reason why I see Bitcoin growing quite fast or Bitcoin DeFi is that a lot of the experiments have already run in a way on different networks, right? So Ethereum said that as well on some of the podcasting. Ethereum has been a testnet for Bitcoin, great testnet, but now everything can actually be adopted even faster on the Bitcoin side. I think those things probably would help to really make it grow faster and bigger than anything we see now. But I think it comes to mindshare adoption, overall acceptance as well. It seems also with the ETFs and stuff, right? You see Bitcoin is accepted as an asset now. ETH share a little bit as well. Like there's also ETH ETFs, but all the other assets not yet, right? So yeah, I think it's just miles ahead, and I'm not sure if it will be like losing that dominance. Bitcoin dominance is, I think, 60% or so. That means that 60% of all crypto assets is actually Bitcoin, which leaves 40% to the rest. And I actually do believe that if eventually Bitcoin dominance will probably continue to go up for even longer, as Bitcoin now allows for programmability and scalability as well. It was always like Bitcoin has never focused on programmability and scalability in a way that was very clear. It was all about distribution, adoption, more going mainstream, right? Ethereum was very clear. It was all about, they focused on programmability, not even really on scalability, because even Ethereum as it was back in the day, not really scalable. Now with all these L2s, it is. So now I think Bitcoin took a more decentralized approach from the get-go and more focus on distribution and really community adoption and stuff. And now they focus on that programmability. I think that's the right order of things in a way.
Episode 196.
From episode 196, this is Anna Kozlowskis, co-founder of Vana. Here, Anna shares her perspective on the next milestones for AI, including advancements in large language models, the potential for agents and agent-like behavior, and the evolving debate between local and cloud-based AI models, highlighting each of their economic and technological implications.
Yeah, I think that just in model performance for LLMs, it just keeps getting better and better, and really starting to see it be good enough that you can have kind of agent-like behavior where agents are able to kind of operate on their own and guide some of their decision-making. I think that that's going to be a really big milestone. I think audio and video models are getting better and better. They're still kind of clunky, still very expensive to work with, but I think that over the course of a year, that there are going to be kind of massive improvements there. I mean, it's just like honestly so great. Like it's an amazing time to be alive and like get to experience AI progress. Week over week, there's like something that comes out and it's like, wow, this is like so impressive. Yeah, another thing I track pretty closely is it's kind of like model architectures, like what actually, as AI models get better and better, like are they going to follow like a transformer model, or are they going to be like an SSM, these kind of different model architectures? That's more of like a niche technical point I just find interesting. Another thing I track that I think is a big open question in the industry is whether most models are going to be run locally on people's devices, right? Like, is it going to be kind of what Apple is pushing towards, where you have an AI model on your device that can work with your data and a lot of it stays local? Or is it going to be something that is in the cloud, right? And I think that has a lot of economic implications, right? Like basically how much GPU demand is going to come from AI inference, and how much of that, then is going to be, in the cloud, or is it going to be local?
Episode 197.
In episode 197, we welcome Rebecca Liao, CEO of Saga. Here, Rebecca explains why gaming is poised to drive the next wave of Web3 adoption. Rebecca presents her argument for how technological demands of gaming, the critical role of DeFi in Web3 gaming, and how consumer-friendly experiences will shape the future of blockchain entertainment.
It always starts with gaming. And that is true for any emerging technology. It's always some sort of game. And it is technology or infrastructure that enables gaming that ultimately gets adopted. Because gaming is usually the hardest use case. It's very demanding. Not only do you have to have a really sleek, smooth user experience that doesn't interfere with gameplay, but you also need the scaling on the back end. And so it's always a very hard technology problem to solve. So you solve it for gaming, you solve it for everyone else. But the other aspect of it is, we see throughout history that things like Slack, for instance, or Discord, these are all gaming technologies. They have much broader adoption now, but they started off as gaming technologies. And so we think that gaming usually leads the way. Now, does that mean that you are going to be technology that's just adopted into the current crop of games, and it improves that gaming experience. And therefore, you find product market fit that way. I don't think it's that simple, actually. For something that is as bleeding edge as crypto, it's probably going to be an entirely new form of entertainment. We started to see hints of it here at Saga. Again, it all goes back to people. And I would say that one of the things that we've really cultivated among the core teams, you really have to listen to the community. Even when you don't like what they're saying, you really have to listen hard. And when developers deliver hard truths to you that, this is crap, you really have to listen hard to that, maybe even harder. Early on, we had a great infrastructure product, scaled like promised, was a gasless experience. But when we launched, the developers who were building on us, they said, this is great, but our tokens are trapped. Our tokens and our NFTs are trapped. This is a problem with any roll-up solution, any sidechains, app chains. Certainly for someone like us that's natively multi-chain, it's a problem. You probably hear it as liquidity fragmentation, but it is the issue that because it's not all one monolithic L1, you are splitting liquidity. And that has both tech and economic consequences for anyone building on you. So our developers told us, you have to solve this problem, liquidity. Otherwise, it's not sustainable to be on here. It doesn't matter the quality of the infra. And that's where the liquidity integration layer came about, is we needed a DeFi layer that would be natively multi-chain. And we are the first chain to do it. So why do I bring that up in the context of gaming? Because, very recently, we saw huge success of Off the Grid. Off the Grid is a shooter title, very competitive category. It's a good-looking game, and a lot of people had a lot of fun playing it. Huge opening weekend. They invested heavily in streamers, which is the right strategy. Got the game to #1 on the Epic Store for a few days. It was awesome. But there was no DeFi component to it. There was no marketplace component to it. And so by not having what we think are really the core Web3 elements, it became any other game. It just happened to be on decentralized servers. What we're finding, therefore, is gaming is going to lead the way just because it's your wedge into consumers. But there is no Web3 gaming without the DeFi aspect. And so we anticipate that that is how it's going to play out. Now, fortunately, we are built for that. But when I think about sort of the next generation of gaming, what will Gen Z, Millennial, or Alpha really find entertaining? It is going to be a mixture of the fact that they have really great game experiences, but there is that economic element, whether it's in a really fast-paced marketplace, whether it's in some, highly speculative elements around a game, what we call the meta game. This is where people will spend a lot of their lives. When I look at all the different verticals and their potential for penetrating into wider mainstream, once again, going back to the ChatGPT success story, it is consumer-oriented, it is easy to use, and there has to be entertainment, almost toy-like value to it. Gaming checks all the boxes.
Episode 198.
In episode 198, we welcome Sean Robb, Technical Product Lead at Flow. Here, Sean explains how digital assets can maintain their value, mirroring real-world ownership, and why this paradigm shift is foundational for the future of blockchain-based economies.
Digital scarcity, the best way of looking at it is really trying to make sure something can maintain its value, regardless of how many times it's been copied or reused, right? So digital scarcity allows for an asset to exist digitally or on the internet the same way an asset would exist in the real world. So whether that's like a LeBron James rookie card, you can absolutely Google that, look it up, and enjoy the view of it. But actually having that tangible rookie card allows for you to buy, sell, and engage with fans of LeBron James or fans of the NBA very differently. What's incredible about that is now we're going to be able to do that on the internet and do that globally, which has just not been able to be achieved before. I don't know how many people have tried trading cards on eBay. It's a tougher world than if you go to something like NBA Top Shot and you can just engage pretty freely and understand the realness of these assets, understand how many of them are actually created. You have perfect data around how many of these things are alive and well and being used. It's a pretty radically different introduction to what can happen with digital assets, and really changes the paradigm for both users and understanding what they can truly own in digital world. They don't just own the access to something, they actually own the asset itself, as well as creators where they can, again, rely on themselves to create the assets that give people the utility that they want to give instead of relying on a platform to be a gatekeeper for access.
Episode 199.
And here for episode 199 is Lark Davis, a prominent crypto educator and analyst. You'll hear Lark emphasize the importance of profit-taking, avoiding common pitfalls, and preparing for the inevitable volatility of future bear markets.
Sure, the time to buy is largely over or running out. There's still going to be things you can throw money into or trades to make, obviously. The one key thing that's going to separate out anybody who succeeds this cycle and those who don't are going to be the ability to sell. A lot of you might already be in profits. If you've been around for the cycle for the past couple of years, you're probably already in profits on some of your positions. I'm not saying you have to sell them right now, but you need to have a plan to take profits, because if you don't take your profits, the market will take them for you. There's basically three kinds of investors. There's the guy who gets in early, times it well, buys low, and he has the courage to sell high, and he was able to fight his greed and sell high. There's the guy who comes late, which is probably not a lot of your listeners. I think you've got a good Web3 community of people who've been here for a while. But as we see the Coinbase app surge and we see the Phantom Wallet surge in the app rankings, we realize a lot of retail normie investors, people who are not really into crypto, aside from it's getting attention now and they want to come in and speculate. Those people are going to be about 90% of investors who come in and they buy high and they will sell low. Unfortunately, that's just the way the game works. And then there's a third category of people. And this is a very dangerous one, because this is where a lot of people get stuck at. They buy early, or even if they've come in a bit later in the cycle, like now, they still buy at good prices, right? And they see massive gains and they don't sell a gosh darn thing and they ride it all back down to zero. So the round tripper, you don't want to be the round tripper, right? You want to be the buy low, sell high guy. And you have to have a plan to sell, because here's the reality. We just talked about this a few minutes ago, but this is just to remind people, the cycles are not broken yet. There will be another bear market. It'll be horrific. It'll be fast. They come fast, right? This is the thing. When markets finally start turning, there's no orderly exit at the top. There's nobody up there saying, okay, everybody this way, get in line, time to sell the perfectly top price. It's just not the way that it works. Okay, so when the time comes, you're going to have to sell basically everything. Now, I always make an exception for Bitcoin, because you don't have to sell your Bitcoin if you don't want to. Okay, if you're willing to ride it through wild volatility and you're happy to have like a 10-year time frame on your Bitcoin, it's the one crypto asset I'm basically convinced is not going to go anywhere. Okay, Bitcoin's going to be there. You can hold it for 10 years. You can hold it for 20 years. You'll be fine. Okay, if you're ready to handle the volatility, you're not going to panic at the bottom and sell all your crypto. Okay, sell your Bitcoin. Everything else, all the altcoins, I don't care what you think about them. If this is the new paradigm of money, this is the most popular meme in the world, this technology is going to change everything, it's all going to go down. Here's some perspective from the 2022 bear market cycle for you. The best altcoins, they went down about 80 to 95%. So that was the ones that performed the best from peak to trough. They went down 80 to 95%. Those were the winners. The vast majority of altcoins simply died. Liquidity completely dried up. Volume completely dried up. Devs slowly just gave up, walked away. Oh, whoops, we got hacked. It's all done. Sorry, guys. Whatever else it might be. Most of these altcoins are going to go to zero. The vast majority of the meme coins are going to go down 99.999%. Only a very few altcoins of the meme coins will even make it to the next cycle. Stuff like Dog with Hat or Pepe or Dogecoin, they're going to make it to the next cycle, would be my bet, right? But the vast majority, come on, man, the hippo meta, the dead squirrel meta, you think that stuff's all going to make it to the next cycle? No. Okay. No, it's not. And a lot of the altcoins, a lot of these layer twos, a lot of the DEXs, all this stuff, they're simply going to die in the bear market. So when you have life-changing money on the table, okay, and some of you are going to, good news, some of you are going to, bad news is most of you aren't going to sell. If you have life-changing money on the table, for the love of God, change your life. Okay, please, because the amount of regret and self-loathing that you will feel for yourself if you do not take that money while it's on the table will be immense. Do not let the greed get the best of you, because it's going to get the best of a lot of people. Okay, you have to fight yourself. You have to fight that inner demon that's going to tell you it's going to keep going higher and higher and higher. You're a genius. You're not a genius. It's just the bull market, and it's a great opportunity. Yeah, it was smart to get involved in the crypto and to hold the assets, to get in early enough that you're able to make profits. The only genius thing in a bull market is to sell. Okay, you have to understand it, because if you don't sell, you're going to be facing utterly horrific losses, and it happens real fast. Okay, you're going to wake up one day and the top will be in and the prices will already be down 20 or 30%. And that's a fine time to sell, but your ego is going to screw with you so bad because you could have sold yesterday for 20 to 30% higher. You need to get out. You need to get out and you need to sell, man. You really do. Because if you don't, all that money, all that potential to, do stuff like buy stocks when they're down 60% in the bear market, to buy crypto again, to run the next cycle up and compound your wealth cycle to cycle, or just to have the financial freedom that you probably so desperately want by being involved in the markets in the first place. All of that disappears. All of that disappears if you do not take profits. Please take profits, guys.
Episode 200.
And finally, in episode 200, here's Ram Kumar, co-founder of OpenLedger. Here, Ram explores the future of AI agents in Web3. He discusses how domain-specific data and models can create more efficient and purposeful agents, from trading and governance to delivering actionable Web3 insights through tailored applications.
If you take a look at the current agent market, right? So it's more as an entertainment where people use agents to tweet and like give shout outs, and it probably maybe like an agent twin which you can interact with, which are like very initial levels of what it can potentially do. But if you want to go much more deeper and make agents maybe to like trade for you, there are some trading agents today, but they're not very efficient, right? But if you want an agent which is like really efficient and which has the knowledge that is necessary to execute a trade and probably like return millions of dollars for you, you would want something which is an expert in that particular field, right? And for that, if you want to build a model, you need to have like very specialized domain-specific data. That is what you can do on top of us, right? You can collect like domain-specific data and build models which are domain-specific for, like, for example, like trading, and which could have much more precise output compared to a existing models that is out there. So you can build much more purposeful agents on top of this, right? You could build an agent for like governance on top of this, which understands this Web3 governance much more detail. You could build agents which give you like Web3 alpha. Like you can just train that with all the history of Web3 alpha that has been happening today, that happened till today. And then you can also give a RAG, which has the current news that is happening, and you can have like a Web3 alpha data net and a Web3 alpha model on top of you, and then you can build an agent which goes ahead and shouts out all the alpha that is happening to you on your Telegram or your Twitter or wherever. So like purposeful agents which use these models, useful unique models, can be built on top of us, and it could be an app, it could be a service that can also use us. So I guess that's how we could add value to the current agent scenes that is happening today.
Thank you for listening to the GRTiQ Podcast, the best of 2024, Part 2.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of the GRTiQ Podcast. It's been an incredible year, and I'm so grateful for everyone who listened, supported, and helped make 2024 another unforgettable chapter in the journey of the GRTiQ Podcast. As we close out 2024 and begin 2025, I want to wish you and yours a happy new year. Be safe, stay healthy, and get ready for an exciting 2025. Big things are on the horizon here at the GRTiQ Podcast, and I can't wait to take you along for the journey. So here's to a new year filled with opportunity, growth, and lots of inspiration. And thank you for being part of the GRTiQ community. This has been a production of the GRTiQ Podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast. Roger that.